Joining us now is Richard Haass, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, also Senior Counsel with Centerview Partners. And Richard, it's great to have you on. And that's really where I want to start with you, because obviously we saw the tariffs announced by President Trump this week, and China really the first one out of the gate this morning with retaliatory tariffs of 34%, but perhaps even more notably, given the fact that we don't really export that much stuff to China versus what they send to us. Rare earth export controls to certain U.S. companies, more companies added to their entities list, and now it looks like GE Healthcare, a anti-dumping investigation, DuPont, China regulators open an antitrust probe, and this TikTok deal, it sounds like, on hold. How does it speak to dynamics between the two countries and the fact that it's not just about tariffs now, but about these non-tariff retaliatory measures, specifically where China is concerned?
I think it tells us a couple of things. One is the Chinese government is mindful of its own domestic politics and what happens on social media there, and the fact that these tariffs were put on unilaterally, publicly. In some ways, the Chinese government, I would bet, feels compelled to respond forcefully. Second of all, just because we went at them with tariffs, though a few days before we went at them with export controls, we expanded the entity list. China also has a whole menu of tariff and non-tariff barriers, and we're seeing them go after select American companies. So this is just their way of pushing back. China, over the last few years, as you know, has also done certain things to try to insulate themselves a little bit from the policies of the United States and others. But my guess is this is setting up a broad negotiation between the United States and China, quite conceivably, as your report suggested, with TikTok forming part of that as well.
So is the U.S.-China trade relationship and how it fits into this possible broader negotiation atypical, or do you expect that more countries are going to take a similar measure to or similar tack to China in terms of retaliation and possible escalation now?
Well, it's both atypical and typical. It's atypical given its scale and given the strategic stakes between the United States and China. So it's an economic relationship embedded in a much larger competitive relationship and potentially confrontational relationship. But I think your point's a good one. Other countries as well will feel domestic politics, and they're going to push back. What will be interesting to see is whether they push back, how would I put it, rather than escalating, they push back and they don't do exactly what we've done. And the idea is to try to avoid a ratcheting up. Because, again, no one's going to benefit from this. We're not going to benefit from a tariff war. Others are not going to benefit from a tariff war. So my guess is other countries are going to look to thread a needle, respond strong enough to manage domestic public opinion and give them some bargaining room, on the other hand, to try to avoid further escalation.
Richard, it's tempting to look at these as individual chess moves, but how long before the global pressure campaign from the Trump administration, of which tariffs are a part, causes a permanent change in the way the U.S. relates to its post-World War II allies?
Well, I think it already has. If you take what's happened economically, you saw, under the previous administration, because of the Republicans in the House, the cutoff of aid to Ukraine. Questions now about whether this administration is tilting towards Russia, the comments of the vice president at the Munich Security Conference. I would say that if you add up the strategic, the geopolitical, say, and now the economic, most of our traditional friends and allies see this as a very different United States. They no longer feel the geopolitical relationships are automatic. They look at the economic relations, which they thought gave them some protection, and instead now the United States is using them as a source of vulnerability.
So what's the point of no return then? What sorts of things might they do that will be very, very difficult to reverse, or if you're in that mindset, repair?
Well, they're going to look to diversify their economic portfolios. They're going to be willing to retaliate with tariffs against us. They're going to try to take more of security into their own hands, which will reduce American influence. Essentially, we're beginning to see elements in Europe of a post-NATO, post-American, post-transatlantic European security order. And I think around the rest of the world, you'll see a diversification of portfolios, both in the economic realm and the geopolitical realm, where countries will try to not eliminate the American role, but dial it down to reduce their vulnerability.